Rockaways Productions presents The Casey Waters Show, episode 286. Is the World Geostrotive? Part 2. Hello, I'm your host, Casey Waters. Today, I will continue with Is the World Geostrotive? Geostrotive is a word I made up. Geostrotive means a world or universe that is tailored to communicate useful information to all individuals at all times. The information is unique to each individual. That is, it is uniquely useful to each individual at all times, although the message might be similar for most people, but it is still individually tailored to each individual at all times. So I will discuss that and what that implies. So today's program will feature background footage from the Mountains to Sea Trail along the Blue Ridge Parkway between Craggy Gardens and Mount Mitchell, North Carolina. So, from Craggy Gardens, you head north on the parkway. I believe it's the first overlook on the right. It's called Graybeard Mountain. From the overlook parking lot, or the overlook pullover, the trail is off to the left of the overlook. You go up through the woods, and the trail goes up and down, perhaps more down than up. Eventually, you come out to a narrow bald along a ridge with some blueberry bushes. Most of the blueberry bushes had blueberries on them, so it was a nice treat. So, it is late in the season now, but there were still some good ones left. Anyway, and I went up, I guess it was around July 12th or so. And after the bald area, towards the end of it's Laurel Knob, and there's a nice overlook. After Laurel Knob, the trail descends through the woods and eventually comes out at the next overlook, which is Glass Mine Falls. The last episode, episode 285, Is the World Geostrotive, may have not made it to MNN. So, viewers who wish to see that episode could do a Google search on it. Anyway, contact me if you want any missing episodes. So, now, let's continue with Is the World Geostrotive? So, we have this guiding message. This message, this information that is useful to us, that guides us, that is tailored to our unique needs, that we are receiving at all times. Sure. So the message is often similar, amongst everybody, even though it is individually unique at all times. Sometimes it seems similar. And of course, it goes back to the Bible and other great religious works that guide us and inspire us, that treat us to respect each other and to have compassion for each other, and to treat each other honestly and fairly. In the Bible, it says the Word became life Well, perhaps there's some truth to that. How ideas become living, how ideas become real. Sure. Well, this might go back to the imaginary territories. Imaginary territories of thought guided by your value system. So, as your value systems change, your imaginary territory changes too. You're associated with the imaginary territory of your value system. Sure. And if we're receiving this guiding message from God or some higher power that helps us through life, well, maybe that could be used to prove the existence of the imaginary territories. Sure. So, where we're heading is towards the line between science and religion. Sure. And we're thinking, well, maybe, or I'm thinking, that this message, although subtle, that we receive to guide our lives, maybe we might be able to prove that it exists someday. That is, scientifically. And maybe that proof could be used to prove the existence of the imaginary territories. Imaginary territories of thought that are determined by your value system. And so you're associated with the imaginary territory that is the same as your value system. Anyway, so this geostrotive thing is all new, okay? Or at least to me. Well, not entirely, I guess. But I guess the angle I'm approaching it from is relatively new and a little different. So it's like opening a big can of worms. I mean, this geostrotive stuff could go on and on, you know. Sure, perhaps covering several episodes, maybe more. Well, perhaps I'll get tired of it before then, but perhaps coming back to it in the future. It's a new concept of mine. Sure. So, that's interesting, and it's a big thing. So it's like coming across this big discovery. It's like going through dense forest where you could hardly move, and then discovering this giant lake, which you might be able to easily cross in a boat. Suddenly you have all this room to move about and explore. You no longer confined. You have this whole new area, this area of geostrotiveness. What does it all mean? Well, I'll continue to explore that. Sure. Well, first of all, it might be hard to detect, and probably typically is, this guiding force, this guiding message, rather, that kind of guides you along, that's telling you what you need to hear when you need to hear it, all the time. So, as I said, it's typically hard to detect. But that doesn't mean it's not there. This is a situation where you might need a little faith. A little faith to make it real. A little faith to make it happen. For if you assume that the world is geostrotive, then it may become geostrotive, at least for you, where the world will give you this guiding message constantly, letting you know what you need to know when you need to know it. Of course, it might apply far beyond the world. It might even extend to the whole universe, with the whole universe being geostrotive. Sure. The whole universe being set up to communicate useful individual information. Information tailored to each individual. So you are privileged to be part of this. To be part of this geostrotive environment. Sure you are. Sure I am. It is a wonderful thing. Because we're being guided in the right way. We're being guided towards happiness, guided towards love, guided towards compassion, guided towards contentment, and guided towards many other positive qualities. Sure. So, as I said, the world is or may be geostrotive, and by extension, the whole universe might be geostrotive. Well, another thing about this geostrotive is it might work better with the individual in a relative isolation. Perhaps in the distant past, when mankind, when the population was far lower. Perhaps, in prehistory, when mankind was tribal, and there were small tribal units, and where the individual often was broken away from the tribe, perhaps having to travel long distances alone through unfamiliar territory, and yet somehow have to find your way back to the tribe. Would the world tell you how to do this? Would God somehow use the world to communicate information to you, useful information to you, even life-saving information to you, to guide you to where your friends are in your family, or perhaps to guide you to food or water, or even all the above? I'm assuming this has happened many times. Sure. And this in itself might be enough to prove that the geostrotive phenomenon is real. For you're not alone when you're alone. If you have a guiding force, if you have guiding information that could lead you to your family or friends, even though you are lost, or information that could save your life, perhaps leading you to food or water, or perhaps leading you to other things. Useful information, sure. As I said, this might have been relatively common in tribal times, in the distant past, when man was often alone and often had to forge across unfamiliar territory. Sure. This geostrotive phenomenon may also extend to all life forms, perhaps here on Earth and throughout the universe. Sure. So, we also have to look at our personal history and think of how we see it. Sure. You want a continuity in your personal history, at least as much as you can. Sure, there's always big changes in our lives. We move to a new city. Perhaps we suffer the death of a loved one. Perhaps a new job, a new school. All of these things could be big changes, and all of these things could be upsetting. Sure. So, and they might seem to break up life, but we have to realize we're the same person throughout all these changes. So, we have to look for that continuity and try to feel it and establish it. And try to see your past favorably, even though you might change throughout your life. Try to understand how you were in the past and not always see it in a negative light, but yet see it in a positive light. I guess the less you change, perhaps it's easier to see your past more favorably. But, well, sometimes change is necessary to improve your situation or just to improve yourself. Your value system changes and evolves. Sure, your imaginary territory changes over your life, at least in subtle ways. And going through all this, it is important to have a continuity of memory and a continuity, at least, of how you felt and what you did and why. And to understand yourself, even though you might have changed over the years, and not to look negatively on your past, but to see it more favorably in a positive light, because you're being guided by the geostrotive wind, so to speak, a wind of thought and information communicated to you by God, tailored to you, to guide you as an individual to do the best thing at all times. Sure. Well, this geostrotive phenomenon, of course, relates to religion. Sure. So you could talk to your priest or preacher, rabbi, or whoever your spiritual guide is, and ask him or her if this is true, if God constantly communicates useful information to us as an individual at all times, information tailored to our individual needs. Sure, they'll probably say yes. Anyway, but the thing is, with religion, often the preacher or priest or spiritual leader often tries to guide the flock, to guide the congregation in one direction and get everybody to see the world in the same way. And sometimes that worldview might have faults in it that the spiritual leader isn't aware of, and so thus he's leading the whole congregation down the wrong path. That's why I say it's best to do this as an individual, to be individually guided by God. Well, be guided by your church or synagogue or religious congregation too. But remember, you are an individual, and God communicates information to you as an individual, and that there could be errors in your church, even in its doctrine, in its worldview. Sure. For I say there's one geostrotive, and it applies to all religions, and all religions are incorporated into it, and all religions are valid in it. Sure. And this one guiding force is guiding us to see what we have in common and guiding us to work things out amongst us, guiding us to love each other instead of fighting each other over petty religious differences. But anyway, so this geostrotive thing is very complicated because it does deal with religion, but sometimes religious doctrine and religious views could contaminate it and perhaps make it so it's not entirely useful to you at the present time. Then again, these religious doctrines and worldviews is often just what you need and often guides you in the right direction. Only occasionally it guides you wrong. At least that's my assumption. But it varies a whole bunch. From church to church, religious doctrine to religious doctrine, culture to culture, war to war, and so on and so on. For many wars are fought for religious reasons. So, where are we anyway? It's like we're on a hike, and it's like I'm saying, I know where to go. Follow me. And I point there to a ridge that might look like it's tricky to hike. And I say, that's the ridge between science and religion. And we're going to ride that ridge. We're going to hike it. We're going to travel along it as best we can. Although it might be tricky, although it might be a little steep, and although the trail might not always be there, we must forge ahead anyway along this ridge, along which carries us into unknown, uncharted territory between science and religion. However, even though it might seem lonely up here on the ridge, we could see a lot when we occasionally get glimpses of views, when we get beyond the forest and above the trees, and we could see far out into various religious views and far out into various scientific views. Sure. And sometimes these religious theories and scientific theories coincide. So we're camped out along this ridge. And there's many of us along this ridge in various places between religion and science. The ridge extends between religion and science, dividing the two. And it's a long ridge. So there's many of us here on it, even though we might seem alone most of the time. There are many of us working on the same thing or similar things, trying to find the connection between science and religion and a way to see reality as it really is. Sure. So we have each individual working on, each individual working on their own project. And then somehow we meet up with each other occasionally and exchange information. So, we come back to some fundamental concepts. Sure. What about impermanence and non-self? Well, I guess they're all a part of this too. Everything is impermanent. Nothing lasts forever. We all die. And if that's true, we have to accept the concept of non-self, because there's no such thing as an eternal self of ours. We all die. Our life ends. Well, our soul continues on. But what happens to our soul? Where does our soul end up? Well, I guess that depends on how we live our lives, which may depend upon how well we listen to the geostrotive guidance which we have been receiving on a subtle level. Sure, we are not ourselves. We are not who we think we are because of the concept of non-self. We are a part of everyone and everything, and everyone and everything is a part of us. We just have to get used to it. Sure, and get used to living with everyone. For everyone is a part of us. and we are part of everyone. For there is no self, for it is non-self, for there is no permanence, because everything is impermanent. So impermanence and non-self go hand in hand. So we have to look at the power of prayer. Sure, there is scientific evidence that prayer works. And prayer, us praying to God, to grant our wishes, to help ourselves or help others, well, we are participating in the geostrotive that way. If that is true, instead of always receiving useful information to guide us, we are providing that useful information and desires to guide others. And perhaps our desires that others might be healthy and happy may come true because we ask God for it to be so. And so there is evidence that prayer works, especially in medicine, especially in curing people of terminal disease. Often miracles are worked through prayer. So it is something to take seriously because there's evidence that it actually works on a medical level and probably on many other levels too. So we must pray that prayer works and pray that our goals will be met and that everyone will be healthy and happy. And we must pray that we can hear God's will better. For even our preacher or priest or spiritual leader might not know God's will entirely. For their doctrine or worldview may be contaminated by selfish greed or other negative qualities. So, we have to ask ourselves. Casey Waters Show. Producer, Casey Waters. Photography, John Blackwell. Email us at caseywaters2@caseywaters.com or call 828-808-4265.